to another Total Transformation seminar. If you were with us last week, we had a very informative session that was led by the Greater Manchester Police Crime Unit, and they gave some very solid advice on how we can avoid and protect ourselves from fraud and particularly from online scams. So for those of you who tuned in last week, I hope you found it very useful. I myself found some little nuggets in there that I wasn't aware of. So I really enjoyed that session last week. Now tonight we have another very interesting topic to look at. In these days, how do we differentiate between truth and conspiracy theories? Okay, there are lots of theories about different things out there, particularly with COVID. It may be about a political party, it may be about a religion. So how do we differentiate between what is truth and what is a conspiracy theory? And to help us walk through this, we have Dr. Beatrice Kastrati, who will be our presenter this evening. She has delved into this area quite extensively, and she'll be sharing some of the insights that she has into this subject. And our moderator this evening will be Dr. Zoe Mwimbi. He will be moderating, so we give a special welcome to both of these individuals, and I hope that we all enjoy and we get something from tonight's meeting. As usual, as the meeting is progressing, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat. We won't be having any live questions being asked, but if you place any questions or queries that you have in the chat, our moderator will make them known to the presenter, and your questions will be answered. So that's enough from me now. So I'll hand over to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Mwimbi.
Thank you, Elder. It's good to meet with all of you today. And it's a very interesting topic because unless you've been really living outside the earth, you will have heard a lot of talk about conspiracy theories and, is this true or not true? And these days you can't take anything and everything for granted, to be honest. And it's good that we have somebody who has
Right, I think Dr. Mwimbi has frozen there. We seem to have lost him there, so I'll just introduce. Are you back with us, Dr. Mwimbi?
All right, I thought I was.
Yeah, I thought you froze for a moment.
All right, no, it's because whenever somebody joins, it blanks me out and writes somebody wants to join the platform, the chat or whatever, the room.
Okay.
Like right now, it says Sham has entered the room. It's asking me to admit them. That's why it freezes me out.
Okay. What I'll do, I will remove you as a co-host so that you will not have.
Yes, please. Let me just be one of them people talking. Yeah, thank you. If you can remove that so that I can introduce, I can ask Dr. Kastrati to get started. He's still asking me to admit people.
You are not co-host anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So without much further ado, let's ask Dr. Kastrati to introduce herself and the topic for today, which is really, as has already been mentioned by the elder, how do we differentiate between truth and conspiracy? What to trust, mainstream or social media? I'll leave it to our speaker for the evening, Dr. Kastrati, to introduce herself and get into the topic without much ado.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be part of this. This is a great initiative that I can only applaud. And of course, wholeheartedly, I support it. And yes, it's a difficult subject, truth and conspiracy. It does sound a little bit black and white, doesn't it? So there's only wrong and there's only right. Well, let me put it this way. There is only evidence and not evidence, because we have to talk in medical terms.
And I will share a short presentation very soon, but I want to share first a little bit about myself. I am a doctor. I graduated in 2006 from medical school in Germany. And since then, I've been mainly working in public health. I do have a master's in public health as well from Loma Linda University from 2015. But I have been working as ADRA country director for 5 years in Albania. And indeed, I lived in Albania for 9 years as a missionary, which was a very rewarding time. And the last 5 years, I was in Germany as a disability assessor. So I'm a doctor by profession, but I have many interests and indeed a lot of experience in talking to broad communities. And yes, I do experience lots of different points of view. And again, it is difficult sometimes to discern what is right and what is wrong, what is truth, and what is a theory or a conspiracy theory. And of course, indeed, we as Christians are often sometimes on the spot to prove whether we're right or wrong. And this is also a trap that we can fall into sometimes. But of course, we do need to put also tonight's topic a little bit in context, because unfortunately, the context is the pandemic. So while I will not be talking about the pandemic, of course, the pandemic will pop up. And there's nothing I can do because I can't help myself. I'm a doctor. I have to talk about it. So before I go on, I just want to share with you that I've had lots of conversations in the past weeks and months since my appointment as a health ministries director about, of course, the pandemic, and also with lots of people that had their own doubts and concerns about literally anything connected with it. And many big words have always popped up. So one of the big words that keep popping up are big money, big pharma, hundreds and thousands of lives lost, either to the pandemic or to the vaccine. So there are lots of big words that are swimming around and that people are using and also mixing up. And I do want to share with you how to look at certain things that are thrown at you in a way that will make you hopefully discern between truth and conspiracy. So let me share my screen. There we go. Truth and conspiracy. And again, a wonderful initiative. Now, let's start with biblical foundation. I think we're talking about the church. This is a church initiative. So we start and we end on a biblical note. And what does the Apostle Paul say? He says the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. Now, that is a beautiful verse, and unfortunately, it has been used by both sections. It is used by everybody because, of course, people who are promoting a conspiracy theory, they think this is exactly what they're doing. They're exposing evil. But I do want to throw your attention a little bit to what is really happening behind the scenes. So yes, there is a wonderful book that I can only recommend. It's called Stuck, and it was written by Heidi Larson. Heidi Larson wrote this book actually before the pandemic, but the foreword she added to the book, and it is as actual as always how people are responding to a vaccination program. So she wrote, "Rumors thrive in situations of uncertainty. So how the public will accept, for example, the vaccine and preventive measures will depend on where we live, how our community and country have treated us during this crisis, very important factor, who we feel we can trust, important factor, vastly important factor,
whether we were close enough to someone whose life was nearly taken by the virus to know the real risk, and whether we have an available vaccine while the threat of the disease is still looming. So this is quite an old quote, but it is important that we see what is said here. How we will accept any public message, any scientific message, depends on where we live, how our community and country have treated us, and who we feel we can trust. So this is very emotional if we think about this, because isn't that a subjective way of looking at things? Don't we think that, well, we provide the evidence and the evidence will tell us the truth? No, whether or not we believe the evidence is dependent on those factors. So what is a conspiracy theory? And interesting, in my town where I live right now, in Manchester, we have a study that is currently underway by Professor Knight of Manchester University, and he is actually studying conspiracy theories. So I've taken lots of hints from his teachings. And yes, he writes, a conspiracy theory has distinguishing characteristics. Nothing is as it seems. Nothing happens by accident, and everything is connected. So as soon as you hear these things, you know, there's a conspiracy. So belief in a conspiracy is belief in misinformation that can lead to harmful behavior and even violence. And yes, we do remember that there have been very violent demonstrations. In my home country, in Germany, there have been extremely violent mass demonstrations already this year and also last year, and police hardly knew how to control them. So yes, it does lead to violence in the extreme cases. But of course, in a not so extreme case, it can still lead to harmful behavior, like not wearing a mask in public or not getting vaccinated, etc. So what are the reasons for promoting conspiracy theories? What is behind this? There can be, again, like Professor Larsen said earlier, emotional, psychological reasons. So a conspiracy theory can take the form even of a religion. It provides not a set of factual beliefs, but it provides a worldview. And this worldview provides identity and belonging. And just a worldview is very difficult to challenge. Flat Earth is a conspiracy theory, but how do you challenge it? Because yes, there is quite compelling evidence that the Earth is not flat. However, it's literally the worldview that is difficult to challenge here. Then we have, of course, political reasons. Conspiracy theories are used as instruments for a certain goal. So not necessarily politics, as in world politics, but politics is everywhere. So we have family politics, we have church politics. So anytime a conspiracy theory is not just believed in or promoted, but it is used as an instrument for something, then it becomes political. And then, of course, obviously, financial interest. So conspiracy theories are promoted, and yes, on social media. And don't be deceived. Everybody who promotes a conspiracy theory on social media will say, we're not taking any money from this. We're not generating any money. Big pharma, big money, big everybody is making the money. We don't. This is not true. Obviously, if there's an ad on YouTube, whoever shared the video will get the money out of it. And of course, most of the time, there are alternative products behind it, like essential oils, supplements, bleach, a miracle mineral solution, and oleander oil that was in the news last year. So, of course, there is financial interest by people trying to push their products through providing an identity and a worldview. So why do people actually believe then in conspiracy theories? What makes them so attractive? So, of course, social media is the bad guy, isn't it? No, it's not. Social media is originally a good idea because it has provided a platform. It has provided a platform to everybody, but especially to people who feel underrepresented, marginalized, and discriminated. And that's a good thing. It gives people a voice. And having a voice is democratic. So social media originally, the way it was thought of in a very romantic, philanthropic way, was to provide a voice to people who do not feel they have a voice in the world. And that's a good thing, isn't it? So conspiracy theories give also the feel of a collective action, a grassroots movement, and that gives people a sense of empowerment and control. Now, what are grassroots movements? Grassroots movements are great because they are movements from the bottom up. They are movements that tell whoever is up there, who is in charge, that here we are the people, we actually want you to change certain things. And grassroots movements are great. For example, I worked in Albania with the Roma community. And what did we start? We started the Reflect project. And Reflect was a method of literacy, providing literacy to adults and empowerment. And that is a grassroots movement because getting people to believe in their own power and control in the greater world gives them identity and gives them a voice. And that's a good thing, again. So collective action, grassroots action, that is also part of a conspiracy theory sometimes. So all these good things are taken over by the conspiracy theory that is using them for the bad, for evil. And why would they do this? Usually there is no agenda. The agenda is chaos. We want chaos. This is what conspiracy theorists say. They want to cause division. And why do they want to cause division? Well, we know the Latin word divide et impera, so divide and conquer. And this is exactly what happens. They want to weaken the cohesion of a community or a society. And indeed, this is what is happening right now. All those rampant conspiracies that are around, what have they done so far? What have they achieved? Nothing. They have only achieved chaos. And in the worst case, sometimes even anarchy. And that is something that is not very good. And yes, unfortunately, there is also concern in our own church. There is some division that we cannot deny and that we will have to think about why this is happening. So there is a very interesting concept that we can use here to get to the bottom of things. It's called the 5 whys. The 5 whys is familiar to everybody who has little kids. Little kids, they will always ask questions and they will ask why and why and why and why and why until you don't know the answer anymore. But this is exactly what we have to do. So again, example, why are people, for example, hesitating to get vaccinated? Well, what the usual argument is, I am unsure the vaccines are safe. But why are you unsure? Well, I don't trust the government bodies, science, or church authorities. Well, why don't you? Well, I don't feel they care about me. Well, that's a valid argument, isn't it? And again, like we said in the very beginning, it all depends on how we feel treated by the governing bodies at the moment and how and who we feel we can trust. So why? Because people feel disempowered and marginalized. That is why. So we see it's an iceberg. I love the image of the iceberg. Why? Because the argument is always the tiniest bit, but the real reason behind all conspiracies, behind all rumors is this down here, disempowerment and marginalization. Conspiracy theories, what do they actually look like? We talk about them, but how can we actually recognize them? So they have certain telltale signs. So yes, any evidence against it is taken as evidence for it. So if I say as a doctor, well, I have evidence that shows that you're wrong, I'm victimizing you, I'm objectifying you, I'm stigmatizing you. So anybody who is promoting a conspiracy theory and is presented with evidence will say, you're making a victim of me, I cannot trust your evidence. Well, they also show a divided world, good versus evil, the people versus the elites, rich versus poor, victims against perpetrators. So it's always this polarization. There is no gray zones in between. And yes, there's a heavy bias against scientific language. The more complicated it sounds, the less we can trust it. We do remember a certain person in the US who dismissed a very good tax plan, I guess, many years ago with fuzzy math. And he was elected. Why? Because he said, well, I don't understand this, so it can't be right. Well, increasing distrust of scientists and scientific practices is a telltale sign. So a person cannot be trusted, or the practices cannot be trusted. And it's always undermining whoever is presenting the evidence rather than debunking the evidence. So we'll get into this. So conspiracy theories are made up of fallacies. What's a fallacy? A fallacy is the use of an invalid or otherwise faulty reasoning or wrong moves in the construction of an argument. So an argument that is fallacious can be deceptive because it appears better than it is, and it on the surface makes sense. So we will talk a little bit about common fallacies, and I'm sure you will recognize some of them from the past news of the past year. So we have fallacies like nut picking. We have cherry picking fallacy. We have the nirvana fallacy, the straw man, appeal to ignorance. We've just heard about that. Ad hominem, so a person, and argumentum ad aurum, so the argument of the money. So these are the names of the fallacies, and let's see. I will tell you a little bit about them, and maybe you can debunk some news once you know about those fallacies. So what is nut picking? Nut picking is a tactic of picking out and showcasing the nuttiest members of a group as the best representatives. So we're picking the nut. We're picking the one thing that stands out as a bad example and say, well, everything is bad. So yes, this is a tweet that has been going viral lately, and it says the same people who have spent 1 year telling you not to worry about COVID because it only kills 3 out of every 100 people are going to spend the next year telling you that the vaccine is dangerous because one of the major 3 brands caused blood clots in 1 in a million people. So they're picking the nut. 1 in a million, that is the nut right here. So it must be bad because there's 1 in a million that had a problem. So what does that look in scientific language? And yes, scientific language can't be trusted, but I have to use it. So here are the actual statistics. Okay, so in over 500,000 patients who had a COVID diagnosis, there were cerebral venous thrombosis, the common blood clot that was so infamous lately, happened in 39.0 per million people. And in around, again, 500,000 patients who received the vaccine, the incidence was 4.1 per million. So there's a difference, 39 per million and 4.1 per million. So what does it mean? Having the disease is much more dangerous than getting the vaccine. But we're picking the nut. We're picking the one case that was unfortunately very, very unlucky. And we pick those cases that unfortunately went wrong, but we do not look at the actual statistics. Why? Because this is complicated to read, and it's easier to listen to something that sounds very, very lurid, very, very sensational. So what is cherry picking, on the other hand, is actually the opposite. Cherry picking means I'm making selective choices among competing evidence. And I want to support my position, but I'm ignoring evidence against it. And that's called cherry picking. So, for example, the drug ivermectin has also been in the news. So the overall consensus from all the official sources is more studies are needed. And that is not a bad thing. More studies are needed. Scientists are very humble. They say, well, I don't know, and I'm happy to admit that I don't know, so I need to study more about it. So let's pick some cherries, shall we? So, for example, We have one study here, again, a randomized clinical trial. It's a very good trial. And it says the findings do not support the use of ivermectin for treatment of COVID-19. So that study actually proved it doesn't work. Now let's pick another cherry. Well, here in India, that study proved it does work as prophylactic. So if I were to pick a particular cherry, I could say, well, it does not work. It is not true. Or I could pick the other cherry and say, well, it does work. Look at it. It was actually very effective. But what should I be saying is we have two pieces of evidence that seem to contradict each other, but more studies are needed to see what is right. So we cannot just pick the one or the other, but we actually have to study this in more detail. So what is the nirvana fallacy? Nirvana fallacy is all or nothing. So it's comparing actual things with unrealistic, idealized alternatives. So it's also called the perfect solution fallacy. Well, we do have the vaccine, and we have talked so much about the efficiency, the efficacy. What does it actually mean? 95%, 67%, all these percentages, and nobody really understood what they mean. Well, what a nirvana fallacy conspiracy theorist would say, if it is not 100%, I'm not having it. Well, that is exactly that fallacy, because perfection does not exist in medical terms at all. So somebody who says, well, it is a little bit effective is more trustworthy than somebody who says it's 100% effective, just because that is the truth. So yes, breaking it down, it says 94, 95% efficacy means that people are actually very well protected. And yes, the math is fuzzy, but this is what it's like. This is science. And just because we don't understand it, or just because we have a problem with math, doesn't mean it is not true. Then we have the straw man fallacy. What does that mean? It means somebody takes another person's argument or point and exaggerates it in an extreme way, and then attacks the extreme distortion to dismiss the original claim. So when I was explaining the scientific method to somebody, basically that happened to me. They said, well, so what you're saying is science is just trial and error. Well, yes and no. But basically, this was exactly what happened. So yes, I'm explaining the scientific way of trying out things, finding evidence whether it works or not. In essence, it's trial and error. But that is not a critique, that is a good thing. So that is the straw man fallacy. Then appeal to ignorance. Yes, it asserts that a proposition is true because it has not yet been proven false. Or something is false because it has not yet been proven true. So again, it sounds a bit complicated, but yes, we don't know about the long-term side effects. So it cannot be true because there is no proof that there are no long-term side effects. Nobody knows the future. We don't know what will happen in 20 years' time. So of course, we don't know the long-term side effects. Spoiler alert, there are none. But this is exactly the appeal to ignorance. We can't know, and this is why it is not trustworthy. So when addressing appeals to ignorance, it's important to focus on what we do know. So yes, in case of vaccines, we know that they are processed quickly and don't remain in the body for 20 years' time. So this is what we do know, okay? And then we have finally ad hominem. It's one of the most common fallacies that are actually quite hurtful to certain individuals. It refers to a rhetorical strategy where the speaker attacks the character or the person making an argument and not the argument. Well, people who read the Bible, they know exactly what happened to Jesus. Jesus was attacked as a person, but not the arguments he was making, right? Or people were attacking, well, out of Nazareth. What good can come out of Nazareth? That is the ad hominem fallacy right there. Okay, discrediting the person and not discrediting the argument. So yes, I heard we can't trust the vaccine because the company is aligned with this movement? Well, maybe, but it does not say anything about it. It just discredits the person, and it does not, or the company, it does not discredit the actual argument. And then finally, at AURUM, follow the money. This is the echo that has been echoing everywhere. Follow the money, follow the money. Once I know where the money comes from, I know it's not trustworthy. And yes, I will not name individuals and foundations that are instrumental in funding research, which is a great thing, because the persons are discredited and the money from them is also apparently discredited. But for many, the only reason that a person dares to disagree is because he or she is being paid off by big pharma or any other wealthy sponsor. And in this worldview, unfortunately, there are only two types of people. It's just people who tell the truth and those people who are paid to tell whatever they're supposed to say. Well, but we're talking about science. Science is neutral. Okay, so the big pharma conspiracy theory is very well known, and it claims that the medical community in general and pharmaceutical companies in particular operate for sinister purposes against the public good. Again, evil versus good, the people versus the elites, that they allegedly conceal effective treatments or make diseases worse. So like the dentist who gives out sweets to have more patients, right? But actually scientific consensus has been bad for big business. So when we actually look at history of science, this is what happens. So the tobacco companies, for example, they were actually quite against scientific findings, but eventually science won out because science is difficult to bribe, because the only currency it accepts is evidence. So no, there cannot be a consensus. 2 + 2 is 4. And even if 10 other people say 2 + 2 is 5, there cannot be a consensus because there is only the one solution. So how can we actually distinguish the truth? Well, let's go back to our little iceberg here. This is where we're coming from. This is where we need to find out what is really happening, asking why. Why is this pushed? Why is this particular theory pushed and promoted? And yes, we need to communicate respectfully. We need to understand the underlying issues right here. But also we need to empower people who are disempowered, because this is an actual problem. There's a problem in the world. I was working in a humanitarian capacity for people who actually are disempowered. And I totally understand where they're coming from. So empower them, and that will actually lead to trust. So, but at the same time, we do need to encourage critical thinking. And this is what this seminar is doing. So encouraging critical thinking through this total transformation series. And yes, education. Education is not the answer to everything, but of course it helps. And I need to add prayer. We need to pray with the people. We need to pray for the people. We need to pray for everybody, because we do have a common goal. We do want to fight evil. We want to promote the good. We want to empower Christian faith, and we do want to actually spread God's kingdom on this earth. So what is the scriptural foundation for us? Yes, where do people come from? Are they coming from a love perspective? And as Paul says, this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. That is the motive, the glory and praise of God, love for each other. That is where we're supposed to come from. But people who want to just spread chaos and discord, yes, we can. I could recite you the entire letter of 2 Timothy, but let's quote Peter here. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And yes, it is so easy to fall for conspiracies, but it is better to be of sober mind, to discern truth from conspiracy. And now you've heard a little bit about common fallacies, and I think it is always worth to look it up. I have plenty of sources, which I'm very happy to distribute, to also hand out. So please, if you need any of those, always come back to me. So thank you very much.
Man, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much, Doctor. And I'm sure you will agree with me that it's been very, very detailed and enlightening. We do have questions, and I will just, the ones that have been put out here on my chat box are it's just the one that I can see, which is a question. There's been a comment. Somebody has asked, is it a fallacy that the statistics of the numbers of COVID-19 deaths are being recorded incorrectly? If so, why is this?
Well, I would say yes, it is. Because why would anybody record such a terrible thing incorrectly? Well, let's argue for the devil here.
Yeah.
What would be my motive to record something incorrectly? Would it be fear-mongering, or would it be making things not as bad? Now let's follow this argument. Let's say I wanted to make it fear-mongering and say, okay, it is not so bad. Not so many people die of COVID. So this was an incorrect claim then. Not so many people actually did die. Well, that is a very bad thing. Why? Because it will eventually lead to people not taking this threat seriously enough and more people dying. So yes, I would say this is a very big fallacy right there. So why would people report those numbers correctly? Of course, to warn, to say, this is what has happened. People, open your eyes. Now, why would I push for the numbers that they're incorrect? I don't believe those numbers. They can't be correct. Why would I say this? Well, probably because I don't want to know, or probably because I'm scared, or probably because I don't want to follow all the restrictions because they make me feel uncomfortable. So I would say, let's always find out why. Why would one thing happen and why would the other thing happen? And then try to follow the conclusions here.
Okay, thank you. Question that I'm seeing here is, are you saying therefore that because governments have been reporting these figures, they should be believed, they should be said to be telling the truth just because it's coming from government?
Well, again, why that question? I would like to ask, why do you feel governments cannot be trusted?
That's the question.
I understand, again, that there are people who have had bad experiences, that have been treated not well, that have reason not to trust, that probably have also other reasons back in their childhood for not having a trust in authority in general. Well, I would like to think, what would be the reason for governments to not trust this? Do you really think that there is one big conspiracy to decimate the world's population? And do you really believe that all over 200 governments on this world are in this together? Because if we look at history, governments and countries normally don't work that well together. So this would be amazing that suddenly all governments in the world are suddenly working together on this one common goal to decimate the world's population. So that sounds a little bit incredible. And yes, I would say, what would be the reason for a government misrepresenting its figures? Yeah, and there we go.
That's fine. Question here is, why is it that the government, of course, we are unfortunately, because there is the pandemic of COVID, we can't ignore it. So why is the government, our governments, reporting or concentrating more on COVID-19 and not on other major killer diseases on Earth?
I would say, bravo, that's a very good question, because I'm not lying. I'm telling you, this is true. I was watching the news with my husband day before. I can't remember. Last week we were watching the news, and yes, they were announcing the figures. Today, that many people died. Today, this was the incidence rate. And I said, why don't they do this with all the other diseases? Why can't they say, this is how many people died of cardiovascular disease? This is how many people died of smoking, because this would be important. This would be an important public health message. And yes, I fully agree. I think they should.
Yeah, ma'am. The other comment here is, you see, the fact that they do not suggests that they are also playing on some kind of conspiracy against the masses.
Yeah, so we can see the fallacy right there. So the evidence for it is evidence against it. So there again we have the circular reasoning, right? And we would always have to ask why. What would be the motive? Okay.
Somebody has written a comment concerning the appointment of the first king of Israel, Saul. He says, God said the government, he had warned them, anyway, if you read the Bible, he had warned them in 1 Samuel chapter 8 that the government would be bad. But then, because they insisted on it, he allowed them to install the king. The question is, based on that experience, why should we trust the government? I know you can't answer that question, but...
let me put it this way, in a flippant and way, but I can do all things through a Bible verse taken out of context. But what did God say? He did not say government is bad. He said you will not like it, and that's very different. Because he said, well, he will ask for taxes. He will draft you into the army. Are you okay with this? And I said yes. Well, that was a very democratic argument, right? I mean, he gave the people the choice. And I said, no, we want it anyway. Okay. Well, if we go to another verse, the Apostle Paul later on in the New Testament says, pray for the people who are in government. So where are we with this one? I think that is a verse that has been totally forgotten lately. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Any other question? Those are the ones that I could see here. Well, this is an interesting comment by one of our friends. He says, something about critical. He says, what is it now? It's a gentleman called Mr. Chang. He's written, he says some people are, here it is. He says many people are too critical. They even forget why they are being critical in the first instance. So that's a sort of a view there. Right, I'm looking for any other question here, which I'm not seeing yet. Here it is. The church in general is too tolerant of conspiracy theories. We should condemn them strongly condemn it strongly when members start spreading rumors or conspiracy theories. We need to be a real keeper for our brothers and sisters. That's one viewpoint here. Right.
Well, can I comment on that one? Because I think that's a very good point of view. Because I disagree.
I think so, yeah.
No, I think, yes, of course, we condemn the theory. We do not condemn the people. So punishing by being more authoritative will have the opposite effect. Absolutely. But what do we want to do? We want to empower. We want to respect. We want to give people a voice. Because the reason why most people push conspiracy theories is exactly the reason that they feel disempowered. So we as a church need to recognize this and make them feel loved, trusted, wanted, respected as members of this community. And yes, this is the democratic principle. This is the church principle. We love everybody, no matter where they're coming from. If we became authoritative and would started condemning, this is not up to us. So respect and love for everyone, a duty of care, that is where we want to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Oh, yeah, so it says, yeah, I think it's similar to what we discussed before. Somebody said the facts, I mean, the reality is we are not hearing enough about other medical problems that are ravaging the world at the moment, in preference to COVID-19 related, especially deaths. Shouldn't that be a warning sort of flag, say there's something not quite right here? The fact that the governments themselves are concentrating mostly on COVID-19 and no other medical problem. Isn't
Well,
that a
that's the
conspiracy
one that
theory in itself?
Yeah, that's the one that is most urgent. But if we remember, before the pandemic, we did have something that the government or public health messages were focusing on, and it's probably not so well known. It's the HPV vaccine, it's the human papilloma virus, that would protect millions of women from developing cervical cancer. But it would require a vaccine for teenagers or for children. Now, that was a big deal. It was cervical cancer is a real thing. People die of it. But the government did talk about this, developed a vaccine, promoted this information. But of course, we had a movement against it. Oh, it was terrible. We were not forcing our children to. But again, there's a bad history. Unfortunately, messages that are important, that save lives, are discredited. And I cannot think of any other reason but malice.
Okay, right. There is a comment here. You say, look, mRNA vaccine is wrongly called, because by definition, a vaccine is not what this mRNA treatment is. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, this is a conspiracy workshop, not a vaccine workshop. I do think that there's plenty of information out there. But if I recall a very important conversation that I had recently, and there was a disclaimer. The person said to me, well, to start with, I don't believe anything you're going to say. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to say it anyway. But the evidence that I could present, if that is discredited, well, what can I say?
That's a good question. Right. There is a comment here. It said, let me see, before I don't want to ignore it. There. Didn't the government admit that they recorded some COVID figures wrongly? And would that not be a basis for not trusting them with many more aspects of these statistics? Well,
I think, especially, you will agree with me in medical terms or in a medical environment, yeah. Admitting a mistake is a good thing, because then it can be righted. I would not trust a government that would say 100% we are always right. We've had those governments in the past. Those dictatorships are not so long ago. We did have election results of 99% for the one party. We do remember all of these things. And those were governments that were not accountable. Well, I'd like to have a government that is accountable, that say, oh, sorry, we did make one statistical mistake here. From now on, we're going to correct it. Now, I think that is more trustworthy, don't you think?
Yes. I think the main concern here is, by the time that admission comes, a lot of victims will have died or affected by that particular wrong decision. So that's why I think this particular person is saying, look, with due respect to that, the fact that the change in direction or assertion of mistakes and so on comes so many months, after the fact, suggests that there's a lot of misinformation even from the government, unfortunately. Now, of course, like you say, they've admitted it in some cases that they were wrong, and it is that which provides grist to conspiratorialists that, look, this is what we're talking about and things like that. Okay, the other one here is, what's your thoughts on specialists who are epidemiologists saying don't take the vaccine for various reasons, such as the effect on the immune system, if not now, later on? Well, what do you think?
Well, again, I want to ask, why would they say this? One of the fallacies is follow the money. Well, this is something that we can think about, but we can always say, well, what would be the reason? What would be the reason? And the reason is always something like self-promotion, promotion of a certain product. Of course, let's assume everyone means well. However, I think a scientific consensus that collects evidence from around the world has a tendency to be right. And while we actually say, well, we have to listen to scientific language very carefully, because scientists never say this is 100% right, this is 100% wrong. They will always say this may be right, this may be wrong.
Probably.
So I think
the word probably.
Exactly, and the probability, and there's a likelihood. Now, these are all statistical ways of expressing a likelihood. But again, 100% does not exist, so let's not fall for this. So there are always individual cases and gray zones that have to be discussed with a GP, with a specialist. And yes, there might be exceptions that we also have to admit, of course. And this is scientific reasoning, because evidence will always be brought about and evidence will always be found for or against. And scientists are humble enough to admit or change their opinion once new evidence is presented. Okay. But again, it is important to always question why a certain argument is presented.
Okay. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. We have just a couple of minutes, and I'll quickly read through some of the comments that I received here. One of our friends says, the CDC defines a vaccine as a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting that person from that disease. But with COVID vaccine, despite taking the vaccine, we are told we are not protected, and we need to do everything as though you were not vaccinated. So it fails to meet the criteria of being called a vaccine. That's an opinion. So I want to expect you to comment, all right? In fact, an understanding, I didn't say opinion, because that's what they understand from the CDC. Our brother says, if we promote education as much as we should, we wouldn't have so much conspiracy. Sadly, conspiracy theories are spreading in the church as well as in the public. And then, of course, one of them asks you, well, how do you come to the conclusion that people are guilty of spreading conspiracy theories? Some people believe in their hearts that what they send is true, and they too do not know what they are saying are conspiracy theories. Is it for you? No, not for you or anybody to condemn them. That's why we have this platform in the first place. We all cannot differentiate some of the things easily, but when you get educated, informed, then it helps you, to judge, using the criteria that you've given us. There's a statement here by one of our sisters, one of our elders, I think it is, says, those people who have adverse effects to the vaccine and died, is it that they already had underlying health conditions? And is this number much higher of people who have died from taking the vaccine? I don't know.
Well, again, it is not a vaccine workshop. We can have a vaccine workshop at another stage, and there have been plenty. But I do want to pick up on one comment I see also in the chat is freedom of choice. Yeah. Like we said, we're a church. We are free. And this is why nobody is pushed. But yes, if a house is on fire, I'm going to ring the bell and say, your house is on fire. You will have to be saved. And again, we as medical professionals who are able to see the evidence and to discern the evidence, we of course have the duty of care to alert other people. And it doesn't mean that we have a personal agenda. My personal agenda is love and keeping my fellow people alive. I have to respect people who are of a different opinion, and I do. But what I do want is not to condemn, but to empower, to educate, to give them a voice. Because again, there's always a reason. In the heart of hearts, they do have a reason for believing what they believe. And I have to respect that reason. And we do have to talk about this as well at a different point about this. But we do need to love the people, and we do need to act out of love. And everybody who's pushing a conspiracy theory should very carefully think about why they're pushing for this. Are they pushing for this because they love their fellow person and their neighbor and they want to protect them? Or are they pushing for a specific theory out of a different motive, but love?
I think there's a very interesting statement. I know time is not with that, but let me just quickly read this one. It says, if the vaccine has a good efficacy, why have the governments given immunity to pharmaceutical companies from being challenged in courts, if it's that efficacious?
Well, I can't even comment on this because I don't know. And again, These are questions that are very specific, that lead away from the actual subject. And the actual subject is to be able to discern common fallacies.
That's right. Okay, thank you very much. This one I can't pass by. It says, I think, Doctor, your problem here is, if you look at the principle of what you've just taught us, that you are elevating scientists to that level of, I don't know, it's like they are infallible because they are neutral. And yet we know that in history, many scientists have been biased. We know that, not that we think. Okay. In your country, during the Second World War, of the people that carried out human experiments in concentration camps, many were scientists. And they produced information about human nature, physiology, based on that. Their reason for doing those researches was to support the belief of the government at the time. But they were scientists.
Well, history has shown that they were not right after all. They were supported in a very specific point. And this is exactly the point, that we have to look at history as a whole. And like we saw with tobacco, that the scientific consensus in the end won out. And again, the actual scientific approach, we should not fall for discrediting people with discrediting the actual product or the actual argument. So again, we have a fallacy right there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a very nice discussion, but time is not with us. I'll hand over to the chairman.
Okay, so can I thank both of you, Dr. Mwimbi and Dr. Beatrice, for leading our presentations and our discussions this evening. I'm sure there are many more questions that could have been asked. It's a very delicate point that we've been discussing tonight. Because as I say, there will be both sides of the argument, because some would say, well, where does censorship come in then if people are not allowed to state their point of view? Where, at what point are people's views not to be taken into account? So, as I say, there's a lot to think about and a lot for us to digest. But thank you both once again for leading tonight's meeting. I'd invite everyone to be back with us next week, next Monday at 7 p.m. We will be looking then at the issue of pornography addiction. Now, this might be quite frightening subject to some of us, but it's a very real topic that is affecting all sectors of society. And would you believe it, that pornography even affects children as young as 12 years old? So it's something that if we've not thought about, we need to be aware of, particularly with our own children and all the devices that they have and the access, the availability and the ease with which pornography can be accessed nowadays. So please tune in at 7 p.m. Invite your friends and families to be with us for this very important subject, which we will be discussing next week. So thank you again for joining us this evening. And again, please join us next week for another Total Transformation Seminar.